You are about to take a trip, a strange and mind-blowing trip, on a bicycle suspended on a razor-thin rail, to far-off worlds where your eyes won't believe what they see, where 1,000,000 volts of electricity create wondrous and frightening effects. These are some of the coolest science museums in the country. Proof that you can learn and have a great time doing it.
Oh, that was cool. That's cool. It's like magic. Wow!
In the next hour, we will visit the Exploratorium in San Francisco, Pacific Science Center in Seattle, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the New York Hall of Science, and the Museum of Science in Boston. We'll meet the creative geniuses that design these exhibits, find out the secrets of how they build them, and learn the science behind how they work. Because while all the science museums in the country are as different as can be, they all have the same goal: making science cool. Standing at the threshold of the Golden Gate Bridge, San Francisco's Exploratorium is widely considered the best science museum in the world. An experimental, hands-on museum, it is designed to appeal to the curiosity in everyone.
That is cool.
The Exploratorium set out to break the mold, and it sure succeeded. You won't find any dusty glass cases or video loops here. Better still, you won't see any do not touch signs. Just the opposite. The message here is dive right in. Everyone can play to their heart's content, blissfully unaware that they're actually learning physics, microbiology, and much more. The spirit of fun doesn't end with the visitors. The museum staff gets in on the action too.
We get it going here. Here we go, really fast. Okay, now tip it to the side. You're the space station out in space, and you've got a gyro. And by turning that gyro, you can turn around without shooting out your rocket motor.
Paul Doherty, the Exploratorium's chief educator, wanders the floor to talk to the visitors and share his love of science.
Our museum was founded in 1969 by Frank Oppenheimer. Frank went around the world and looked at other science museums in Europe and got some ideas about how to make a brand new kind of science museum, one in which people interacted with the exhibits. And then he looked all around the country and he found this big building in San Francisco, the Palace of Fine Arts, left over from the 1916 World's Fair. And he rented it from the city of San Francisco, put in a dozen exhibits, opened the door, and people came with no advertising on day one. And so now here we are, 3 decades later, and right now there are 500 exhibits on the floor. We make about 1 new exhibit a week and put them out, and then people come and play with them.
So see, that's why you see the dark cells.
3, 2, 1, push.
The Exploratorium exhibits are truly unique and educational. But what keeps people coming back for more is the cool factor. The man responsible for melding science and aesthetics is exhibit designer Sean Lonnie.
I don't go into building exhibits like I want to build a beautiful thing. I go into building exhibits like I want to show people how beautiful this thing is. And in that way, it becomes aesthetically pleasing. This piece was designed after I discovered this phenomena of playing around with dry ice on water. It wasn't necessarily dug out for a specific reason. It wasn't designed to show something specifically, but I was really enamored with the aesthetics of it. And for me, that was enough to kind of drive the process forward and build an exhibitor out of that.
That big one! Look at how fast this one's going. Oh, it's going to go into the... Look at how fast that big one's going. Whoa. Wow. This is so cool. It always goes fast.
This has a lot of different behaviors. Every time it feeds the dry ice in, they kind of run around and propel themselves in odd ways. You get a lot of bang for your buck with this. All I'm doing really is dropping little bits of dry ice in water. The water's dyed blue so you can see the clouds a little bit better. But when the dry ice feeds, it hits the water and it outgasses. So you have this kind of, this propellant. And the gas itself is invisible. It's a CO2 gas. But it's so cold that the water vapor glongs onto it. So it ends up spinning these really complex patterns. There's enough going on here for me not to have to do a lot. I just have to set up the parameters, which is make the water so that it doesn't freeze up, figure out some way to contain the dry ice until I need it, and figure out some way to keep the water clean and the conveyor belt running. And that was my job.
So this is like comets out in space. The comets have water ice and dry ice in them, and they outgas and they make tails. So sometimes in the sky you'll see a comet.
Icy bodies in orbit are cool, but when water heats up, things really start to move. Case in point, 3 15-foot glass geysers that replicate the inner workings of Old Faithful.
As you're looking at this geyser, you can see that at first the bubbles are quite small around the heating element. And now they're getting bigger and bigger, and that's as the temperature of the water increases, the bubbles grow to a larger size. And eventually those bubbles are going to lift the water above. They're going to fill the tube above with water vapor instead of water liquid. And that will instantaneously drop the pressure. It'll drop the boiling point, and the entire chamber will burst into steam and eject out the top. So there it goes. It's erupting now. And you can see the water rushing up that tube from the boiling chamber.
Water is inherently beautiful. If you fill an 8-foot diameter dish of acrylic with water and look through it, it's a beautiful lens. But in the case of the geysers, every part was meant to be transparent so that you could just kind of glance at it and see everything happening on the inside.
The Exploratorium doesn't just build exhibits for itself. These designers, engineers, and scientists are responsible for conceiving and constructing installations for science museums around the world. They're the experts in their field, creating exhibits that are fun and engaging, yet never losing sight of the goal of teaching. True to form, the on-site workshop is open to the public. It's a unique glimpse into this specialized world, and a must-see for anyone who wants to know how all these cool exhibits come to life.
When you walk into the Exploratorium, the first thing you see if you look to the right is the machine shop where we build all of our own exhibits.
You can put your head, ow! Boy, that's loud.
And so obviously the cool thing about that is it has its own resonant frequency. Yeah. And then as you sing through, if you sing through the scale, like at the frequency that it's resonating at, it pops there.
Oh, that's great. How do you get air to them?
Yeah, that's the problem.
We start with futzing around and playing with ideas and playing with materials and seeing if we can find something that is kind of wondrous or interesting or surprising. And then we start the pursuit. We bring in the teachers, we bring in the scientists, we have discussions amongst ourselves, we build prototypes, and we build them again and again to see how they kind of open up. And once we finalize this kind of loose process, we start to hone it down. We start to make some design decisions. We start to test it on the floor and see how people respond to it. Eric, you got anything to show? Aw, come on, I know you do. You got something. I know you do. Oh, that's Albert. I grew up with him. You know, that's the funny thing about working here, as I came here as a kid since I was 8 or 9 years old. So I grew up coming here at least 2, maybe 3 times a year. So I have these memories of like this creepy face over here. It's called Albert, and it will track your motion as you move left and right.
Sort of the minimum you can do starting with a lampshade and yet having human emotion, or at least emotion that we might attribute. It sort of has this presence, and when you get near it, it sort of feels nervous. When you step back, it's calmer. It feels more comfortable with you, but it kind of always tracks you. And yet its functionality is only to see where you are and follow that. So it really it's amazing how little it does, and yet it feels like something.
Thanks, Eric. I think Charles has one more thing. It's actually pretty cool.
Sean oversees the design process, consulting with the designers at all stages.
Hey, there's a fog in there, and what Charles has done is rotated a laser around and taken a cross-section of that flow. I mean, this is your typical kind of prototype. You got your various level clamps there, and he's got some jury-rigged fountain mister.
there's an ultrasonic humidifier down below that creates the fog. It comes up through pipes that enter this tub here, and there's a false bottom, so it comes in under there and then diffuses out here. And then in the center is a laser pointer that's pointing straight up to a mirror that's at 45 degrees, and then the mirror is spinning. So the laser's shooting through the center of the shaft, the mirror's in this hollow shaft, and it spins around and creates a plane of light. And that plane of light slices through, gives you a cross-section of the fog and the turbulence that you see in the fog.
Our favorite question, Not, is what's it supposed to show? And in that question is a bit of a arm folding and a withdrawal from what's happening in front of them. They just want to be told what they're supposed to learn so they can look at it, learn it, and move along. And in a lot of ways, that shows a lack of will to invest themselves in the learning, their own learning. They want to be told. And I think a place like this isn't about telling people. It's about inviting them in to experience it. What is that?
The workshop is on the museum floor, so when an exhibit is ready, they just bring it out for the visitors and staff to experiment.
Ah, you're smiling. Something strange. Man, that's strange. Hey, good, thank you. Sounds like we're in the tunnel while you're wearing those, doesn't it? Good. So that was my first time at that exhibit too. And I was learning what it does. I had no idea. I've never seen it before. No one's asked me about this exhibit. And I see we have something to do.
Exhibits evolve every day at the Exploratorium, sometimes right on the museum floor.
This exhibit is all about mobiles and building mobiles. And the cool thing about it is when you build this mobile, you get to kind of spin it, and it's nice to watch all the different parts move. But there's kind of a side effect to this exhibit, which is that kids take it and they spin it really quickly, and that's dangerous. And so I wanted to restrict that, but I also didn't want to lose that kind of like almost poetic motion of a mobile. And so we're building this kind of apparatus that sits up here, and this is stationary, and then this flywheel moves with the pendulum, with the mobile. And so if a visitor tries to spin it really quickly, it will slow down. But if they just gently push it the way that I kind of intended for this exhibit to work, then there will be no resistance.
The job of keeping a science museum cool never ends. They have to be constantly updated to stay fresh and interesting. While one exhibit is back up and spinning in San Francisco, you'll literally be spinning 800 miles up the coast at Seattle's Pacific Science Center. Standing in the shadow of Seattle's Space Needle, Pacific Science Center was born as the United States Science Pavilion over 4 decades ago. Like its famous neighbor, it was built for the 1962 World's Fair. Here, the 2 guiding principles are interactive and ever-changing.
Ice cream.
If the animatronic dinosaurs don't scare you, then head out to the courtyard and climb aboard the high rail bike. Ever wonder what it's like to be a circus acrobat? Here's your chance to find out. Riding 20 feet over a pool of water on a razor-thin 1-inch rail is not for the faint of heart. But rest assured, you can't fall off this bike. All who try it get a guaranteed thrill and a first-hand lesson in levers, fulcrums, and center of gravity.
I'm a little nervous. This is my first time I've ever ridden this, actually. But I know it's safe. Read up on how it works.
The high rail bicycle was originally developed for a sports exhibit that dealt with the science of sports in the late 80s, and we've kept it here because it was so popular. And the thing is once you try it, you'll remember that you did this exhibit over and over again. People can experience the feeling of balancing on a rail that's 1 inch in diameter. And the main reason that they're not falling is because the center of mass. As long as the center of mass is below the rail, they won't fall.
So why doesn't the bike fall? The rail is the fulcrum, and the counterweight at the bottom of the rod is far enough from the fulcrum to keep the center of gravity below the rail, making it impossible for the bike to tip over. That is, unless the rider weighs over 500 pounds.
If there was no weight at the bottom of the lever, which there's a 200-pound weight, but if there was no weight down there, then the center of mass would be above the bike and the bike would tip over. But since it's below the bike, then the bike's going to stay on the rail and you won't fall over. People get scared and they stop pedaling and they get stuck out there. But we have people who come out and they help them get started again. I think it's very important to make science fun for the kids because a lot of times, you know, learning's something you do at school. They're not going to want to, you know, do it outside of school. And with something like this, they often don't know that they're actually learning, and they're just having fun doing it.
If the butterflies in your stomach aren't enough, head inside for the real thing. Butterfly exhibits are a popular trend in museums these days. Pacific Science Center's Tropical Butterfly House is the one by which all others are measured. The tranquil beauty of this living exhibit guarantees many repeat visitors. But this beauty comes with a price. Butterflies are cold-blooded and can only fly if their body temperature is above 86 degrees. They warm up their flight muscles by basking in the sun. And since they're in Seattle, that means expensive full-spectrum lighting, temperature and humidity control every day of the year. And all this for the butterfly's entire lifespan, which ranges from 1 day to 4 weeks.
I'm releasing these paper guide butterflies, and what I'm doing is I'm grabbing all 4 wings of the butterfly so that they don't start flapping around and damage their wings, because the wings are very fragile.
Butterflies have a very short lifespan, so every day butterflies in the exhibit are reaching the end of their life, and we're placing new butterflies on the exhibit that have just emerged from the chrysalis. We might put 60 to 100 butterflies each day back out onto exhibit. Maintaining this exhibit is it's a process of making sure the butterflies are contained, making sure they have the environment that they need.
Why is it curling its abdomen?
He's probably scared because I'm taking him out of the box. Our fingertips have oils in them that'll, you know, destroy the butterfly wings if you ever touch them. So that's why I have gloves on and I have tweezers on.
When we built this exhibit, we really wanted a living, breathing exhibit that instead of coming up to it and looking at it through something, you walked right into it, and the boundary disappeared between what's you and what's the exhibit. And part of why our visitors have to be so careful in here is because they become part of the exhibit for the time they're in here. They become part of this environment. The butterflies are going to fly up and interact with them. They may land on some lucky visitor. They may land right in front of somebody. We're so close and so interactive with them, and yet it's a different kind of interaction. In a lot of our exhibits, the interaction is touching and looking, and here it's being looked at by the butterflies, being part of their world instead of having them come to us. The butterflies in here are drinking juices from overripe fruits. And what happens is as the fruit begins to ripen and soften, it puts out a little bit of juice. And the butterflies are using their proboscis, that's the tube-shaped mouth part that adult butterflies use to eat. They're drinking up the liquids from that fruit. They can't come in and chew it. They don't have anything to chew with. So all they can do is sip liquids. And this exhibit is really nice because the butterflies aren't trying to fly away. They're so focused on getting the juice out of these fruits that I can be right here next to it. I can show them to visitors. Kids can see their wings, they can see their legs, they can look at the body parts of the butterflies without worrying about scaring the butterflies at all.
Maybe one right there because it's really wet. Wow!
The butterflies sure are beautiful, and the high rail bike is quite a ride. But hold on tight, because we're about to travel back in time on a prehistoric journey, and then jump back to the future on a space odyssey at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. The Denver Museum of Nature and Science is more than just a cool place to visit. It's a national center of research and science education, and one of the top places in the world for the study of dinosaurs. As you might expect, their collection of fossils is top of the line. And that's just the beginning. It's part of an interactive experience called Prehistoric Journey. What makes this journey so special? Well, for one thing, you're not so much visiting a museum as you are strolling through a real-life fossil lab. And you never know, a big discovery might happen before your eyes. Amateur scientists are welcome to bring in their own finds. Not only do they get to use this top-notch facility, but they also receive guidance from the museum's world-renowned paleontologists.
That's basically what it might go to another bone, because they've dug up 1/3 of this guy so far. And so it might fit another piece.
In the dinosaur lab, this is where all the work that takes place after we've gone out and collected the dinosaurs and brought them into the lab. They're usually covered with rock and what's necessary to remove all that rock, and this is where what's done. This lab here is a viewing lab so that the public coming to the museum can look in and actually see the work being done, as well as sometimes interacting with some of the people that are working, so that they can explain what the fossil is, how they go about cleaning it. So in one sense, this is an interactive lab.
What kind of dinosaur is it?
It's a Patasaurus. Long neck, long tail dinosaur, big guy.
Have you found all the pieces yet?
Well, they found about 1/3 of him so far. They're still digging him.
Okay.
What I'm doing is I'm cleaning the dirt away from the rock, and I'm trying to, as you'll notice, all the rocks are broken up in a lot of little pieces. So what I do is when I find a couple rocks that, or a couple of the fossilized bones that fit, then I glue it together. Like this. This has all been glued. And eventually this will fit right onto there like that.
Do you ever get a bone from another dinosaur and have it all figured out and then figure out that that bone doesn't go to the dinosaur you're building?
Well, that happens a lot because
there's not that many.
Sometimes 2 or 3 dinosaurs die in the same place.
Before you get the idea that the Denver Museum of Nature and Science is stuck in the past, check out Space Odyssey. There are hands-on interactive exhibits, live demonstrations, and even a voyage to a Martian canyon.
Space Odyssey is unique in all of the world. We wanted to combine several different elements. We wanted to have interactive devices. We wanted to have an information infrastructure so that we could update Space Odyssey all of the time. And so if you come here, you'll notice that we have up-to-the-minute information about space science. We wanted to integrate a live performance element, and we wanted to have an immersive environment.
The Martian Canyon offers a lifelike rendition of the surface of Mars, but the best part is that the audience can talk to the astronaut as he conducts realistic experiments. A little Hollywood trickery and you'd swear he's really walking on the red planet.
This is a suit that we had made by a Hollywood costume company. They do some work with NASA in order to get their costumes pretty accurate and have done work for a lot of Hollywood movies. So it is sort of accurate looking, but it absolutely is a costume. A real suit like this would be $1 million and would actually have pressure seals, and you could really go out onto the surface of Mars. If we went out onto the surface of Mars with this, it would not be good.
Wow, that's quite a piece of equipment you've got there.
Yeah, we're going to be doing some core drilling today, Jennifer.
I can imagine it really is very different on Mars than it is on Earth. What are some of the differences?
It is drier than the Sahara Desert. It is less air up here than the top of Mount Everest. It is, the temperatures go from a wide range, which is really a surprise. But I want to show you why it's so dry. This is pretty interesting. And the gravity, of course, is less.
What's that?
I've got a jug of water over here. Any idea what will happen to this water jug when I open up the lid?
I don't know. What would happen if you open that up?
Well, check it out.
Whoa.
It instantly starts to boil.
Why does water boil on the freezing cold surface of Mars? The temperature at which water boils is dependent on the atmospheric pressure. The lower the pressure, the lower the boiling point. We all know that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit here on Earth, but it would boil at only 50 degrees on the surface of Mars.
The water molecules, when they reach the surface, because there's atmosphere, most of them don't escape from the liquid water. There's some evaporation. But when you don't have very much atmosphere pushing down on the top of the water, any of those water molecules will just sort of fly off into space, and you actually get boiling. This is room temperature. This is not hot water. I'll show you something that I bet you can't do at home.
Check that out. Oh my gosh.
Check this out. This rock back home would weigh about, almost 200 pounds is what I would think. Who can tell me why I can lift this rock so easily, besides the fact that I am a macho, bodybuilding kind of guy?
How can our astronaut here pick up a rock that's clearly that heavy? What do you think?
There's no gravity?
Well, there's some gravity. If there were no gravity, what would happen to me if there were no gravity? What would happen?
What do you think would happen if there were no gravity at all? What do you think?
You'd start floating?
I would start floating, exactly right. But there is about 1/3 the gravity as there is back home, and so something like this weighs only about 1/3 as much as it does. There we go. Mars is smaller, and so it's actually pulling on me, pulling on the rock hammer, pulling on everything, not as hard as the Earth would do.
The Space Odyssey can take you to another world, but we only need to go across the country for the next cool museum, the New York Hall of Science, where the worlds of sports and science collide. Just beyond Shea Stadium's left field wall stands the New York Hall of Science. Built as a pavilion for the 1964 New York World's Fair, now it's a world-class science and technology center, pulling in crowds from the 5 boroughs and beyond. The New York Hall of Science takes pride in turning science into a game. At times, it can look like a magician's gallery, where nothing is what it seems. Optical illusions are everywhere. Visitors take a mind-bending trip into the world of color, light, and perception. These are more than brain teasers. They show how the eye works and how we perceive the world around us. It might be fun, but there's a lot of serious science going on.
Look.
These are what we call microorganisms. You've probably heard of the term germs or microbes being used.
Yeah.
Now, of course, those aren't scientific words we use because I guess convenient to shorter, easier to say. And we call these microorganisms. These microorganisms come from the family of creatures we call protists. Like in nature, you have plants, you have animals, you have fungus, you have bacteria, and you have protists. As you can see, like there's very, very small dots in here. And the little lines are the big worm-like ones we just saw.
Okay.
You can actually see those because those are kind of big. But that's just about as clearly as you're going to see anything.
They're really tiny. They look so big on the screen, too.
The microbiology lab gives visitors a glimpse into the invisible world all around us. But the newest exhibit proves that science really is everywhere you look. This is the New York Hall of Science's Sports Challenge. It didn't take long for it to become the most popular exhibit in the building. And it's not just popular with the visitors. Don't be surprised to find the Hall of Science's director joining in the fun.
We know sports engage people. And it turns out there's an amazing amount of science in sport. Almost any game you play, you can learn by sort of practice and intuition. But if you think about it a little, there is in fact a best way to throw a curveball. The physics of the curveball is fairly well understood. There's the best way to hit a ball to get the maximum range or the maximum speed. And all of that is classical physics. I happen to be a physicist, so I think this is neat.
The Sports Challenge is all about the science behind sports. Taking a fresh new look at our favorite pastime can teach us a lot about friction, aerodynamics, physics, rotation, and balance. Each challenge comes with a crash course on the underlying science. Visitors are invited to test their skill, competing with themselves or their friends. Most people hop on the mechanical surfboard and find out their bodies already know about balance and center of gravity, even if they haven't learned physics.
Try stay low. So you ready? See if you can stay up. All right, now notice her good technique. She's got her arms spread out. And because her arms are spread out, it's easier for her to change her center of gravity to keep it right over the center of the surfboard. And now she's bending over. That's lowering her center of gravity. Again, the more she can do to keep her center of gravity over the center of the board, that's what's going to keep her upright.
The wheelchair race compares a traditional wheelchair on the left with an aerodynamic racing chair on the right.
If you guys look at these two wheelchairs, what is different about them? What is something that's different about them?
The way the wheels are shaped.
The way the wheels are shaped. Okay, very good that you noticed that. What else can you notice?
One's elongated.
One is elongated. Very good. Okay. You ready? 3, 2, 1, go. All right, let's see who wins.
The rider in the racing chair glides along with an easy motion.
Now I want you to look at the two individual and their motion. Now, wheelchair 2 obviously won. Let's switch chairs on and see what happens. Right. Go.
With its larger wheels and ergonomic design, the racing chair wins every race, regardless of the size and strength of the rider.
Wheelchair 2 wins. This one is obviously built for speed. It's angled inward, brings it closer to your arm. Also, if you were to lean forward, it'll actually give you more of a stroke forward, which will give you more speed as you're moving along.
This is a speedometer. It's going to test how fast you can throw the ball. Okay. So which one of these balls you think you can throw the fastest?
I'm going to say this one right here.
This one right here?
Yeah.
New Yorkers love their baseball, and the centerpiece of the Sports Challenge is the pitching cage, where visitors line up to time their fastball. While they're breaking a sweat, they're also getting a physics lesson.
Now this is a popular exhibit. You can tell it's popular because we usually have long lines of people waiting to use it. Even better, take a look at the floor. We've got to put new carpet down already, and the exhibit's only been up a year. So it's popular. Do you learn anything from it? I mean, everyone loves to take a baseball and throw it as hard as they can. Well, there's a couple of things you can learn. One is there's a device here that tells you how fast the ball's going.
To measure a pitch's speed, a radar gun sends a pulse of radio waves at the ball. The waves reflect off the ball and bounce back to the radar gun. The ball's velocity is calculated by using the difference between the transmitted and reflected signals. It's a principle known as the Doppler effect.
Now this gentleman's doing a pretty good job. So notice that he lifts his foot way up high. Now what does that have to do with the arm and the ball? Well, it has to do with your whole body. You've got to convert as much of your energy into this ball's energy as you can. And so the more parts of your body you can get involved in throwing, the more mass is going to be moving, and when you finally release the ball, the more of your energy you have put into it. Maybe we'd like it to move to the left, or move to the right, or just stay up higher. And we can do all that by how we release the ball. Some more good physics. This is the physics of aerodynamics.
The movement on the ball is probably the most scientific element of pitching. The seams are the tricky devils on a baseball, because the ball reacts to the wind and how the seams spin on top of the ball or underneath the ball. A basic fastball is released with backspin. The seams are moving this way. It gives the illusion of the ball rising. Of course, it's not, but it's staying up and moving faster. For a curveball, you want the spin top to bottom. You want the seams coming over the top of the ball as frequently as possible, as fast a spin as possible, to create as many occasions when those seams hit the air and then the air pushes it down.
Low air pressure below and higher air pressure above causes the ball to curve and drop.
I love it. I think using sports to teach physics is a good idea.
At the New York Hall of Science Sports Challenge, the air is always charged with excitement. But for a real charge, we're heading to the Museum of Science in Boston. Move over, Ben Franklin. Electricity is about to hit a whole new level. The Museum of Science in Boston is a true classic. Vast halls, hundreds of exhibits, and a flavor that is both local and universal. But one exhibit in particular stands out for its size, beauty, and total uniqueness. The Museum of Science's Theater of Electricity. It holds one of the world's first and largest Van de Graaff generators, developed right here in Boston. Originally designed in the 1930s as an atom smasher, the 32-foot-tall behemoth generator still gives a lot of bang for the buck. 70 years old and still guaranteed to thrill. This awesome display of power and pyrotechnics never goes out of style.
So I need a volunteer for a second, someone who's not afraid of all this high-voltage electricity. You look like you might work for this. Would you be willing to come down and help me for a second? Come on up here onto the stage. Turn around, wave goodbye to everybody. We'll turn on that small Van de Graaff generator. We'll build up that extra charge.
We've all experienced this phenomenon at one time or another, but why does it happen? The generator pumps positively charged electrons into her body. They travel up and out through her hair. Each hair is now positively charged, and since opposites attract and like charges repel, the hairs try to get as far from each other as possible. The end result? A majorly bad hair day.
Van de Graaff generator is that gadget that makes your hair stand on end. You've probably seen pictures of people touching the top of a sort of electrical-looking gadget. It's actually something, though, that was invented to study the inside of atoms. Robert Van de Graaff, the man who invented Van de Graaff generators, worked right here in Boston, and we're lucky enough to have the original and still largest Van de Graaff generator.
With its bizarre equipment and flying sparks, the Theater of Electricity looks like a mad scientist's dream. And the guys at the controls love to show it off. What's not to love? They're commanding the power of a full-scale electrical storm.
We have some small Tesla coils to the left and right, and these small Tesla coils run off of vacuum tubes and put out about 70,000 volts, and we use those to have volunteers come up and hold or light up incandescent light bulbs.
If I take an ordinary fluorescent light bulb and turn on our Tesla coil, what happens? The light bulb lights. No wires connected to it. That electrical energy is coming through the air.
We have a Jacob's ladder, which is just two parallel conductors that form a V, and a high voltage spark that's initiated at the base, and the spark is nothing more than a high temperature gas, in fact so hot that it's ionized, and because it's warm it's less buoyant, or it's more buoyant, less dense than the surrounding air, and that's what causes it to rise. We have some larger Tesla coils that are behind the wires, and they're actually quite loud, and I can demonstrate those for you. And then we have one over here at the left. And It's difficult to estimate the output, but it's somewhere on the order of between 500,000 and 700,000 volts.
Behave in the same way.
Tesla coils are named for Nikola Tesla, the man who proved that electric sparks do not go through encased metal objects, but stay on the outside. To drive the point home, Mike enters a giant bird cage that gets struck by over 1 million volts of electricity.
How many people think I'm going to die?
To the spellbound crowd, it looks like a huge risk. But of course, it's completely safe.
And as you can see, I'm absolutely safe.
One thing the audience doesn't get to see is how all this lightning is created. 50-foot belts spin inside the generator at 40 miles per hour, collecting electricity at the bottom and discharging at the top. When enough charge is collected, a bolt of lightning explodes from the generator dome.
So right now we're underneath the Van de Graaff generator in the room that has all the motors and electronics and things that make the machine work. It's safe right now because we're not turning on any of the charge that I was talking about. We're only running the belts. But if we were to begin turning on that charge, then it would be dangerous to be here. This door has to be closed while the machine is operating. If we were actually making sparks, we would take some negative charge and put it on these pieces of metal that are underneath the belts. The charge would sort of be sprayed from those points to this belt. The belts would pick up that charge and carry it up to the top of the machine. Here we are at the top of the Van de Graaff generator. We're about 15 feet higher than the floor that you can see outside. Surprisingly enough, while the machine is working, it's perfectly safe to be in here because all the charge stays on the outside of those spheres. So you can actually touch the metal on the inside while the machine is producing 1.5 million volts, and you'll be absolutely safe. So now we're going to start the motors. And just as you saw below, they're spinning at about 40 miles an hour. These belts will carry extra negative charge to the top of the machine. These metal points remove that negative charge. So here I am at the top of the Van de Graaff generator, inside those 15-foot aluminum spheres. We've just turned on the rubber belts, and they're carrying extra negative charge to the top of the machine. This may seem like a very dangerous place to be, but it actually couldn't be safer. I'm only half an inch away from 1.5 million volts, and yet I'm still perfectly safe. Watch as we make some sparks.
This is pyrotechnics with a point. To ease some fears, dispel some myths, and bring some dull theory into dazzling practice.
I feel a little bit like the Wizard of Oz when all these sparks are happening all around me. But I really love talking to people about electricity and all different kinds of science.
The Van de Graaff generator is definitely the coolest one. It generates a lot of electricity.
It was like, whoa.
It's about time to turn this machine all the way up, make the biggest sparks we can to make an indoor lightning storm.
Mike dims the lights on the theater of electricity and unleashes a few million volts for the grand finale, doing what all great science museums do, electrifying our imagination, sparking our interest in science, and generating lifelong memories in every visitor.